next thing we'll talk about is accessibility identifiers. Now, accessibility identifiers are something that's used for the accessibility of your application to help users of your app that maybe are blind to be able to navigate through your app. And the way that UI testing is structured is it's actually built on the accessibility framework. So we're going to look at why you would want to add these accessibility identifiers in order to have your tests work a little bit better and more efficiently. So the objective here is obviously so that you can add accessibility identifiers to your UI elements to improve your testability in your app. So going back to the app that we've been testing, the Classmates app, what I've done is I've added I've just created a classmate just as soon as this classmate controller is initialized, so that we start out with a user inside the application without us having to make one ourselves right here, just so that we can test. What we're going to do is make a test that checks to see if we can tap on this cell and change this to blue. And we're going to hit save and make sure that it's saved. So what we're going to do is, let's jump back into our UI tests and we'll say test update. Call it update first classmate. So I want to look at how this is going to work with the recording process, and we're going to run into a potential problem, and this is again kind of where the recording is great maybe to start out with, but ends up not being awesome in the long run. So let's go ahead and record here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tap on this first cell here, change the favorite color to blue, and hit save. Okay, so let's look at this. So we're getting the application, and you notice I didn't talk about this in the last video, but you get the application in every single test here, and that's how you actually access everything inside of it, like the tables or the text fields, navigation bars, and so on. So then we're going app.tables, so tables or table views, right? And then we're accessing this static text, and you notice this. Let me pull this, make this a little bit bigger. You notice this little drop down. You can choose between the static text here or the cell static text. I'm actually going to choose the cells static text. So what we're saying is we're essentially saying in this application, on this view, there should be a table, and then there should be a cell on that table, and its static text, or essentially just its label, should say Joe, and then we want to tap on that, and then we'll go into the favorite color and everything. But what I want to illustrate here is this this label is dependent on the name being Joe. So maybe, for example, if we change this now to be, I don't know, Carl. Oops, sorry, not run it. And if we run this again, watch what's going to happen when it tries to access this static text here. Nothing happens and it crashes because there is no static text with Joe. So this can be a potential problem where, if you have, basically any app is going to have data that is changing and it's not always the same. So we can't really rely on the text that's inside of a label, for example, or, if we look at how this was working in our create classmate, what it was doing was it was taking the name here from the placeholder. And maybe in my own apps, I've changed the placeholder text, depending on maybe a segmented control or something. So using these things to sort of query for the text field that we're looking for using sort of this query syntax here, or here looking for the cell whose static text is Joe, it doesn't really work super well. And so what we can do is, like I said, UI testing is built on the accessibility framework. So what we can do is add an accessibility label to this as sort of, or sorry, an accessibility identifier to this to make this have sort of a one, like an identifier that will never change no matter what, you know, the text of the label is, or the text inside of this text field, or its placeholder text, or whatever. It's sort of unique and behind the scenes to the application here. So what we can do is we can click on the cell here, and if we go to the identity inspector, there is this accessibility section here. And what we can do is just change this identifier to something that's more suitable. So what I'm going to do is just call this classmate table view controller dot cell. You don't have to follow this syntax necessarily. You could just call it like you know, classmate cell or whatever. This was also something suggested by the developer at Cocoa Heads who kind of went over UI testing, and I really like it. And there's a reason for that we'll go into in one of the next videos. So actually, I think I'll call this classmate cell. That's a little bit more descriptive. So now what we can do is, let's go back to our UI test. So now we don't have to use the, you know, the sort of string Joe in the label to identify the cell. What we can do instead is just simply use the tables.cells, and we've added the accessibility identifier to the cell itself, not the label. So we'll use this query on the cells. So what we're saying here is we're saying, in the application, go through the tables that are available on the screen. Sorry, let me pull it up. On the screen here, and obviously we only have one. And then we're saying, throughout those tables, look for a cell with the identifier, this long identifier. And this query language can be kind of confusing, I suppose, at first. So for example, going back to like we'll go back to the cells.static text. This query language here is looking for Joe. The way that it works with, just for example, inside of this label is it will look for the label's actual text here, or it will look for it in either the accessibility label or the accessibility identifier. So you can be sure that, you know, if there's no extra work that you have to do to say, hey, this identifier is in the accessibility identifier. It's not a part of the cell visually to the user. It just knows to look in all of those places. Okay, so then we can just say .tap on that cell. And I'm actually just going to delete this. Let's just see if we can get this working to actually recognize the cell, first of all. There we go. Perfect. So, you know, maybe we want to change this back to Joe, just as an example. And rerun our test. And then it will work for Joe as well. So it's completely independent of whatever's on the cell. We've just kind of said, hey, just look for, you know, this kind of cell and tap on that. So that's great. In this case, you know, we only have one cell, and it works fine. If we had more than one cell, we would have to, you know, find the index path of that cell and then go ahead and tap on that one. But this works for now. So this is great. So adding an accessibility identifier to everything that you're going to want to test is really going to be key for having your tests be sort of independent of the information that's being displayed on them. You know, when you're actually going and testing your app, you'll probably be testing the same information, but it's wise to add these accessibility identifiers to, you know, anything that you want to test. So, for example, you know, you could add the identifiers for all of these text fields, and then, you know, no matter what the placeholder or the actual text in the text field is, your tests will still work. And this will make sure that as your app, you know, grows and gets a little bit more complicated, and maybe for now you're never changing the placeholder text or the actual text of, well, you're never changing like the placeholder text at the text field. You know, maybe sometime down the road you do, and when you do, you end up breaking your test and you wonder why, and you know, it's looking for this name as the identifier where you've changed it to, you know, something else, maybe in Spanish or something, so it doesn't say name anymore. Using this identifier is really going to be a helpful thing for you.